Algebra 2, Lesson 2.6, Special Functions. Today we're going to talk about absolute value. In the previous video, you learned piecewise functions. In the next video that you will learn step functions. So today we're going to focus on the absolute value functions. You have graphed these before. You've graphed them in your graphing calculator. We're going to hand graph them, and then I will make sure I show you how to graph them on the graphing calculator in class. So make sure you ask me that if you're ahead of the rest of the class. So when you're working with an absolute value function, the very first thing you do is make a t-chart. And you can start with your values that you like, -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. But notice when you graph this, if it doesn't form a V, and all absolute value functions form a V, if it doesn't form a V, you need to pick some more values. So what happens is you plug these in, 4x, and the absolute value, and so you say, that what is the absolute value of -2? +2. What's the absolute value of -1? +1. What is the absolute value of 0? 0. What's the absolute value of +1? 1. And what's the absolute value of 2? 2. Then you need to go plot your points. So at -2 it's +2. -1, +1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2. And so now you see what your graph looks like. So you can go ahead and make your points. Absolute value always looks like a V. After you've done your points, you need to do domain and range. So in the first one, you look at your possible x values. As this grows and grows and grows and grows, it's covering all of these x values here. So it's -infinity, covers all of them, goes all the way to -infinity. Parenthesis because we can't contain infinity, and as this one goes up and up and up and up, it's covering all of these x values, so -infinity to +infinity. Now let's talk about the range. This V is pointing up, and there's none of the graph down here, so you're coming up, 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 there's nothing here, there's nothing here. Our first point's 0, and that point is included, so there's a bracket. And from 0, then it goes up forever. These lines will cover all of these y values, so 0 to infinity with a parenthesis. Now let's do one where it shifts. So we'll do the function equals the absolute value of x minus 2. And so this graph has been moved 2 units, and we'll see that in a second. So go ahead and make your t-chart. I'm picking these values, but if you notice I left some space there because I know that we're going to probably need to pick some more values. So let's plug these in. -2 minus 2 is -4, and the absolute value of -4 is +4. We plug in -1. We get -3, absolute value of -3, +3. So let's go ahead and fill out the rest of the t-chart, and then unpause it and see if your t-chart's correct. So hopefully your t-chart and my t-chart match. And so let's graph these points. So we have -2, +4. So -2, +4. We have -1, +3. We had 0, 2. We had 1, 1, and 2, 0. If you notice, we have not seen our turning point yet. It looks like it's going to be turning somewhere down here. So let's pick a couple more values. Let's go ahead and pick -3 just for the sake of seeing if it's going to turn that way. And then let's pick some more where we think it's going to turn. Plug in -3. -3 minus 2 is -5. Absolute value of -5 is 5. So then we have 1, 2, 3 when we plug those in. So now let's go plot our new points. -3, 5, still didn't turn. But at 3 we have 1. So if you look here, we have found our turning point. So it kind of looks like a check mark, but it's not. If we would keep going with our points, they would be the same on both sides. So we found our absolute value graph. Now let's do our domain and our range. Domain, range. Domain's your x values. Remember, as this goes up and this goes up, our domain will be negative infinity to positive infinity. Your domain for all absolute value graphs are negative infinity to positive infinity. Your range, we are looking down here at y values. As you're coming up, there's nothing down here. Your first y value that you run into is 0. And you do 0 and it goes up forever, so 0 to infinity. Let's do one more absolute value graph. And we will say the function is negative absolute value of x plus 1. And we're going to see what that negative sign does to us here in a second. I'm going to leave some space there in case I need to come back. So when we plug this in, you have to plug it in. Remember this negative sign on the outside. You have the absolute value of negative 2 plus 1. So the absolute value of negative 2 is positive 2, but then this negative sign comes in front of it. So you have negative 2 plus 1, so you have negative 1. Then you plug in negative 1. Absolute value of negative 1 is 1, and then that negative goes in front of it, so negative 1 plus 1, you have 0. So pause it, fill out the rest of the chart, and then unpause it and check your answers. Okay, so now since you've checked your chart, let's go ahead and plot our points. We have found our turning point there. And if you notice from the t-chart, you can tell when your turning point, we have our middle value because they're the same on the both of the other sides. And that's when you know you have found your turning point. So graph it. Hopefully you've noticed on this one, it's facing upside down. And so what happened was this negative sign over here flipped your graph. The negative sign in front flips the graph. So now our domain will be the same, but our range will be a little bit different. So as this one goes out forever and ever and ever, all of our domains covered. So negative infinity to positive infinity. Your range from pointing down is coming up. So you've covered all of these values down here. So you have negative infinity. You're coming up, and your graph stops here. None of these values are included, so it stops at a y value of 1 and a bracket around it, because bracket is the same thing as like a closed circle on a number line, and parentheses is like an open circle.